The war in Ukraine had stretched on far longer than anyone had anticipated. By late 2025, the Eastern Front was a jagged scar across the land, a patchwork of craters and shattered villages that bore little resemblance to the green fields they once were. On February 24, 2022, Russian forces had rolled across the border, expecting a swift victory. The Kremlin's 72-hour dream had crumbled under fierce Ukrainian resistance and logistical failures, giving way to a grinding, brutal conflict that echoed the worst of Europe's past wars, Stalingrad, the Somme, all over again. Nearly 1 million casualties later, the fighting showed no sign of stopping. Cities like Mariupol and Bakhmut had become graveyards of concrete and steel, while the countryside lay pocked with the debris of drones, tanks, and men. I'd been in Ukraine since the early days, back in 2014, when the war was still a shadow conflict, Crimea annexed, separatists clashing with Ukrainian troops, and contractors like me slipping through the cracks to tip the scales where governments couldn't officially tread. My name's Jackson, though that's not what's on my passport anymore. I worked for a private military company out of the States, one of those outfits known more for aerospace contracts than the boots-on-the-ground work that kept the cash flowing. By 2025, I'd seen enough of the war to know it wasn't just bullets and bombs that haunted these lands. There were stories, whispers passed around in the downtime, when the gunfire stopped and the adrenaline faded. Soldiers and contractors alike spoke of things they couldn't explain, things that lingered in the fog of war. This story isn't about me, not directly. It's about what I heard from a guy named Reese, a contractor I'd run with for a couple of rotations. Reese was solid, ex-army, broad-shouldered, with a dry sense of humor that cut through the tension of a firefight. He wasn't the type to spin tales or chase ghosts, which is why what he told me stuck with me. We were holed up in a shelled-out farmhouse near Lyman, a town that had traded hands so many times it was more rubble than real estate. It was late, the kind of quiet that sets in after a day of dodging drones and praying the next artillery barrage doesn't find you. Reese lit a cigarette, the glow casting shadows across his tired face, and started talking. It was back in 23, he said, exhaling smoke that curled into the cold air. We'd been tasked with holding a stretch of highway south of Siversk. Command wanted us to keep the road open for supply runs, but the Russians had other ideas. They'd been hitting us with everything, arty, drones, infantry probes. We were a mixed crew, me, a dozen other contractors, and a handful of Ukrainian regulars who'd stuck around after their unit got chewed up. Good guys, but they were running on fumes, under-equipped, underslept, and half of them jumping at shadows. He paused, flicking ash onto the cracked floor. The highway ran through this flat, open stretch, but there was a village off to the east, Kamyanka, they called it. Maybe 30 houses, a church, couple of barns. Our map showed it as cleared, but those maps were garbage. Half the time they were pre-war, didn't account for what the fighting had done. We'd been taking sniper fire from that direction for days, so the boss decided we needed to sweep it, make sure no one was setting up a nest. I took point with 6 guys, 3 contractors, 3 Ukrainians. Call it 1,400 hours when we rolled out. Reese leaned back against the wall, his eyes distant. The approach was quiet. Too quiet, you know? No birds, no wind, just that heavy silence you get when a place has been dead for a while. We hit the outskirts, started clearing house by house. Most of them were empty, doors blown off, windows gone, furniture smashed. Found a few bodies, old ones, civilians who didn't make it out. Nothing unusual for a war zone. But the deeper we got, the weirder it felt. One of the Ukrainians, Petro, kept muttering about the place being cursed. Said his grandpa told stories about Kamyanka, how it swallowed people during the last big war. I smirked at that, figuring it was just nerves talking, but Reese shook his head. I didn't buy it either, not then. Petro was jumpy, kept crossing himself every time we passed the shadow. We hit the church last, big stone thing, half the roof caved in from a shell. Door was intact though, heavy oak, locked tight. I figured it had been barred from the inside, maybe someone holed up in there. We stacked up, got the breaching kit ready. That's when it happened. He took a long drag, letting the silence hang. Before we could even touch the door, it swung open. Not slow, not creaky, just bam, wide open, like someone yanked it from the other side. We froze, weapons up, waiting for an ambush. Nothing. No sound, no movement. I called out, "Identify yourself," but all we got back was this echo, like the wind bouncing off the walls. Except there was no wind. I shifted, leaning closer. "What did you find inside?" Reese's jaw tightened. We went in slow. Place was a mess, pews overturned, icons smashed, dust everywhere. Looked like it hadn't been touched since the shell hit. But in the back, behind the altar, there was this trapdoor, half hidden under rubble. Petro didn't want to go near it, said he heard something down there, a voice. I told him to cut the crap, but I'll admit, my skin was crawling. We pried it open, rusted hinges, took 2 of us to lift it. Below was a cellar, pitch black. Dropped a flare down, and it lit up, bones. Piles of them. Old, brittle, some still wrapped in scraps of cloth. Looked like they'd been there decades, maybe longer. Bodies from the war? I asked. That's what I thought, he said. But here's the thing, there was a kid down there. Alive. Maybe 10 years old, curled up in the corner, staring at us. Skinny as hell, eyes huge, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. No idea how he got there or how he survived. We called up to him, but he didn't move, just kept staring. Petro lost it, started yelling in Ukrainian, something about spirits guarding the dead. I told him to shut up and climb down to get the kid. Reese stubbed out his cigarette, grinding it into the floor. The second my boots hit the ground, I heard it, a whisper. Low, guttural, right behind me. I spun around, nothing there. Just the kid and the bones. I grabbed him, hauled him up to the others. He didn't fight, didn't say a word, just clung to me like I was the only thing keeping him alive. We radioed for evac, set up a perimeter outside the church. That's when the shooting started. Russians? I asked. No, he said, voice flat. We heard gunfire, rifles, maybe an AK, close, like it was coming from the village. But when we fanned out to engage, there was nothing. No muzzle flashes, no tracks, no enemy. Just the sound, echoing around us. Lasted maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. The Ukrainians were freaking out, saying it was the dead fighting their war again. I didn't know what to think, still don't, but we got the kid out, handed him off to a medevac crew an hour later. He lit another cigarette, hands steady but eyes haunted. Later, I talked to one of the guys who'd cleared Kamyanka a month before. He swore they'd checked every building, including that church. No trapdoor, no bones, no kid. Said the place was empty, just rubble. I don't know if he missed it or if something else was going on. The kid never spoke, not to us, not to the medics. Last I heard, he was in some refugee camp, still alive but silent. Petro wouldn't go near that village again, said the whispers were the souls of the dead, trapped there since God knows when. Reese fell quiet, staring at the ember of his cigarette. I didn't push him. I'd heard enough stories like that, locked doors opening, voices in the dark, things that didn't add up. War does that, stirs up the air, thickens it with death and pain until you can't tell what's real anymore. I'd seen it myself once, near Kremina, when a drone hovered over our position for 10 minutes, no sound, no payload, just watching. We shot it down, found it was one of ours, battery dead for days. No one could explain how it got there. The war kept grinding on. Drones buzzed overhead, dropping grenades on men who'd never hear them coming until the blast. Social media was flooded with clips, soldiers clawing at the dirt, screaming as propellers whirred closer, others firing blindly into the sky. It was modern warfare laid bare, raw and unfiltered, but beneath it, something older lingered. Reese's story wasn't unique. There was Castro's tale from 14, the patrol that called for help after they were all dead, the kids behind a door that shouldn't have opened. And now this, a cellar of bones and a whisper in a ruined church. I think about that kid sometimes, wonder what he saw down there. Was it hunger that kept him quiet, or something else? War's got a way of breaking reality, of letting things slip through the cracks, things that don't belong in daylight. Maybe it's the energy Reese talked about, the weight of all that suffering piling up until it takes form. Maybe it's just us, seeing shadows where there's nothing left to see. We left that farmhouse the next morning, pushed back into the fight. Reese didn't bring up Kamyanka again, and I didn't ask. But as we moved through the shattered landscape, past fields turned to mud and metal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Not the enemy, not drones, just something in the silence, waiting for the next burst of chaos to wake it up. The war's not over. No end in sight, like they say. It's not about who's right, just who's left. And in the spaces between the battles, in the smoke and the ruins, those whispers keep going. Soldiers hear them, contractors like me feel them, and no one's got an answer.